1. About this book. Today's war is not a war against Adolf Hitler, nor is it a war against the Nazis. It is a war of peoples against peoples, of civilized peoples envisioning light against uncivilized barbarians who cherish darkness, of the peoples of those nations who would surge forward hopefully into a new and better phase of life, pitted against the peoples of a nation who would travel backwards enthusiastically into the Dark Ages. It is a struggle between the German nation and humanity. Hitler is no more to be blamed for this German war than was the Kaiser for the last one, nor Bismarck before the Kaiser. These men did not originate or wage Germany's wars against the world. They were merely the mirrors reflecting centuries old inbred lust of the German nation for conquest and mass murder. This war is being waged by the German people. It is they who are responsible, and it is they who must be made to pay for the war. Otherwise, there will always be a German war against the world. And with such a sword forever hanging overhead the civilized nations of the world, no matter how great their hopes, how strenuous their efforts, will never succeed in creating that firm and solid foundation of permanent peace which they must first establish if ever they intend to start the building of a better world. For not only must there be no more German wars, in fact, there must not even remain the slightest possibility of one ever again occurring. The final halt to German aggression, not a temporary cessation, must be the goal of the present struggle. This does not mean an armed mastery over Germany, or a peace with political or territorial adjustments, or a hope based on a defeated and repentant nation. Such settlements are not sufficiently conclusive guarantees of no more German aggression. This time, Germany has forced a total war upon the world. As a result, she must be prepared to pay a total penalty. And there is one, and only one, such total penalty. German Germany must perish forever. In fact, not in fancy. Daily, the truth is being impressed upon us by observation and upon others less fortunate by bombs that the German doctrine of force is not one based upon either political expediency or economic necessity. The personal warlust of those who lead the German people is but a component part of the warlust which exists as a whole in the German masses. German leaders are not isolated from the will of the German people because apart from this will, they could not come into being or exist at all. Their personal inspiration, the motivation, even the acquiescence to their deeds are one and all drawn by German leaders from the very depths of the German national soul. Far too often, the claim has been made that the present German drive towards world domination is only street gangsterism practiced on an organized national scale, deriving principally from the lowest classes, the dregs of Germany. Such a claim is not sustained by facts, for the same lust, the same brute force which the Germans display today under the rule of the so called low class Nazis, they also displayed in 1914, at the time when the highest classes and the noblest specimens capable of being produced by the German nation, the Junkers, ruled that land, and a vast number of Germany's intellectuals, another German high class, sat as members in the German Reichstag. No, the problem of Germanism must not again be passed along to the next generation. The world must never again be stretched and tortured on the German rack. Ours is the problem, ours the solution. The world has learned with a knowledge born of tragedies too numerous, too horrible to record, that regardless of what leader or class rules Germany, war will be waged against it by that country, because the force which compels it to action is an inseparable part of the mass soul of that nation. True, that soul, one time, might have been otherwise fashioned, but that time was in the civilizing cycle of 1,000 years ago. Now it is too late. We know that. Our men of 1917 did not. They had no precedents on which to base their experience. We have not that excuse today. Their futile sacrifices and their empty efforts must today dictate our own actions and decisions. We are paying today for the lack of experience of the last generation in dealing with the peoples of the German nation. When and if the time comes again for us to take similar decision and action, we must not repeat their mistake. The cost is far too great, not alone for us, but for all future generations. We must bring ourselves to realize that no leader can govern Germany at all unless, in some manner, he embodies the spirit and expresses the war soul existent in the majority of her peoples. Majority is used advisedly, for in speaking of the masses which compose a nation, it must be impartially conceded that some factions of the mass must perforce vary from it. Consequently, no unfair contention is here being made that everyone in Germany is guilty of its heinous offenses against the world. In fact, we shall, in pursuing our point, favor Germany by allowing that as much as 20% of her population is entirely guiltless of complicity in her crimes, as well as being foreign to any share of her war soul. We therefore grant, for argument's sake, that some 15 million Germans are absolutely innocent. But shall Poles, Czechs, Slovaks, Austrians, Norwegians, Dutch, Belgians, Frenchmen, Greeks, Englishmen, Irishmen, Scotsmen, Canadians, Australians, and Americans, for we too may ultimately feel the spike of the German boot? Shall all the people, numbering some 300 million of the most civilized, most enlightened on earth, suffer constantly and face unnatural death every generation so that some small part of Germany's populace may continue to exist? All those 15 million Germans so valuable, so indispensable to mankind that 300 million guiltless men, women, and children shall fight a war with Germany every time she so decrees? Shall perpetual struggle against the German be the only future facing civilized people? Why breed children while Germany breeds war? Are not the Dutch a sober and thrifty people? Are not the French cultured? Are not the Czechs industrious? Are not the Poles deeply attached to a land, family, and God? Are not the Scandinavians a decent people? And are not the Greeks brave and fearless? Are not the English, Irish, Scotch, and American freedom loving and progressive people? And in very simple arithmetic, are not these 300 million more than 15 million Germans? If democracy as Americans know it is majority rule in a national sense, it must be so in an international sense as well. The greatest good for the greatest number is democracy's rule of thumb. To fight for world democracy is to secure the rights of the majority of democratic peoples against the incursions made upon them by any autocratic minority. If this is not so, why conscript a vast army for democracy's defense? Why train American soldiers to murder a hypothetical enemy of democracy when the will which spawn this enemy waxes and grows with each successive bloodbath. In 1917, American soldiers, as those of every other major nation, were forced to murder by the millions. What for? Suppose we are forced again to kill, for wars are won only by such killing, not by dying. And what for? Another sellout? Is selling our soldiers to become a national habit? For quite patently, to fight once more in democratic defense against Germany, with any goal in view save that country's extinction, constitutes, even though it loses a war, a German victory. To fight, to win, and not this time to end Germanism forever by exterminating completely those people who spread its doctrines, die to herald the outbreak of another German war within a generation. Let us then beware, for it is not illogical to assume that someday the soldier, if constantly marshaled and regimented against his will, may emerge from underneath the time-worn cloak of duty and come, like labor, capital, and civilian, to demand his rights. It must not be unreasonable to conjecture that a soldier must have rights too, as well as duties. Certainly, a man forced against his instincts to kill has rights, perhaps not the rights of wages and hours, nor the rights of profits, not the rights of untrammeled speech against his superiors, which in a military sense spells catastrophe. No, none of these, just a few simple rights, three of which would appear his incontestable duty to demand. One, that he be adequately supplied with the proper arms in sufficient quantities so that there be a maximum of speed attached to his killing. Secondly, that he not be betrayed by fifth columnists, who must, in wartime, be summarily dispatched by imprisonment or execution. And lastly, of the primest importance, that he receive a definite avowal by his government guaranteeing him once and for all time that his whole ghastly, horrible business of killing the Germans is at an end, that his son may know peace without having to kill for it. If such a guarantee be not vouchsafed him before his struggle, or not upheld after his struggle, as it was not the last time, although the generals knew, among them our own Pershing, that Germany at that time should have been unalteredly snuffed out, may he not then take such action in his own hand? Granting labor has the right to strike when its rights are violated, granting that capital withhold itself from circulation when it feels its usage unprofitable, granting that the civilian feels tyrannized when his civil liberties are jeopardized, what course may the soldier not take once he realizes he has been cheated, once too often, out of that for which he killed? When the day of reckoning with Germany comes, as come it will, there will be only the obvious answer. No statement or politician or leader responsible for post war settlements will have the right to indulge in the personal luxury of false sentiment and specious sanctimony and declare that Germany, misled by her leaders, shall deserve the right of resurrection. He will not be permitted this time to forget so easily the bomb blasted, earth entombed millions of women and children who lived through a hell on earth, the bullet ridden, tank crushed bodies of soldiers, the many countries whose energies were sapped and resources drained, and most of all, he will not be permitted to disregard the unselfish sacrifices made by the common people so that the beast that is Germany shall never roam on earth again. It is a definite obligation which the world owes to those who struggled and died against the German yesterday, and to those who are fighting him again today, as it is the bounden duty of the present generation to those yet unborn to make certain that the vicious fangs of the German serpent shall never strike again. And since the venom of those fangs derive its fatal poison not from within the body, but from the war soul of the German, nothing else would assure humanity safety and security but that the war soul be forever expunged, and the discreet carcass which harbors it forever removed from this world. There is no longer any alternative. Germany must perish. This war, with its harboring miseries, is indescribable. German devastations, its unutterable German atrocities, is born of the war soul of those barbarians of whom Machiavelli, writing over 400 years ago, observed. German towns are at little or no expense in any living, but in laying up military stores to make good their fortifications. On holidays, instead of other diversions, the Germans are taught the use of weapons. History repeats itself. We can remove a tiger from his natural environment, his lair in the jungle, and with patience so tame him that eventually he will respond to our caress, feed from our hand, and perform our command. The more acquiescent he becomes in response to this outward conditioning, the more deceived are we in believing that his jungle days have been forgotten. This is a fatal deception, for inevitably there comes a time when the tiger soul within the tiger drives him again to the use of gang and claw. In that inexorable response to the irresistible soul force, the tiger reverts once again to jungle force. He becomes again a killer. And so it is with the people of Germany. They may respond for a while to civilizing forces. They may seemingly adopt the superficial mannerisms and exterior behaviorism of civilized people, but all the while there remains ever present within them the war soul which inevitably drives them, as it does the tiger, to kill, and no amount of conditioning or reasoning or civilizing, past, present, or future, will ever change this basic nature. For if no impress has been made upon this war soul over a period of some 2,000 years, is it to be expected that of a sudden, on the morrow, this miracle will occur? This analogous linking of the people of Germany with savage beast is no vulgar comparison. I feel no more personal hatred for these people than I might feel for a herd of wild animals or a cluster of poisonous reptiles. One does not hate those whose soul can exude no spiritual warmth. One pities them. If the German people wished to live by themselves in darkness, it would be strictly their own affair. But when they make constant attempts to enshroud the souls of other people in those fetid wrappings which cloak their own, it becomes time to remove them from the realm of civilized mankind, along which they can have no place or right to existence. We need not condemn the Germans. They stand self condemned, for it suffices us to read and hear those words, written and spoken only by Germans, who endure sufferings and dislocations caused solely by the German people in pursuit of their megalomaniacal ideals and demonic aspirations, to realize that it is the Germans themselves who decree, almost demand, their ostracism from their fellow man. They have lost the wish to be human beings. They are but beast. They must be dealt with as such. This is an objective viewpoint, carefully considered and factually sustained. It is the view taken of them in this book. Naturally, there are men in this world, our own country included, who think otherwise and who would deal differently with the German menace. It is the custom of such men to take what they term a sensible view of the problems and progress of humanity. These men would rely upon fate to fashion the future. They would, in effect, permit the Germans to conquer and enslave the world by explaining in terms whose decree of vociferousness is dependent upon the extent of their own personal motive of gain, that German world domination cannot last forever, that at some future date, Germany would ultimately lose its iron grip upon the world, and then enslaved mankind would come to free itself again. Or, if neither collusion nor surrender seem palatable to their listeners, they would suggest a compromise with the Germans, the so called negotiated peace. These are soulless postulates. They can originate only in men whose hearts and souls are still held captive by the marine life of their origin. Human species of spineless jellyfish floundering about in the waters of yesteryear. These are men of the past, forever living in that past. Men who, being incapable of mastering their own intellectual and spiritual primitivism, seek to drag others down with them to that murky depth of Stygian blackness which surrounds their own pitiful existence. These are the men indeed who, witnessing the actual enslavement of such civilized and humane people as the Austrians, Czechs, Poles, French, Dutch, Norwegian, and Belgians, would all too willingly close their eyes and simulate disbelief in that which is stark and dread reality. These are men who, with fatalism as their creed, come intellectually to be anesthetized by it, who, proclaiming fate an ally, have become its most pathetic servants. Fortunately, such men are not yet in the majority, nor will they be, unless Germany can harness, employ, or bride enough of them to spread the German netherworld doctrines throughout the earth. But even as a minority, the dangers which these appeasers represent is nonetheless real, and they must be harshly dealt with. For such actions as they may take under the cloak of quote unquote unquestioned patriotism, it is apparent that they would not do so unless within their own soul there existed some part complementary to the war soul of the German. Those others appeasers, whose integrity is doubtful and patriotism questionable, those who advocate the principles of Germanism, are downright traitors to their country. And when, as if a government cannot or refuse to treat them as such, may it not come time to depend upon the people, whose life and liberty are at stake, to do so? I have no desire that this work be considered as a means of encouraging war for this or any other nation. As a human being, I deplore war. As a civilized member of a civilized nation, I hate it. I hate war not alone for the sufferings, misery, tragedy, and senseless waste which follows in its path, but even more because I consider it to be the still unsevered umbilical cord which binds the moral and spiritual embryo of man to the physical womb of the beast instinct. And I know that as long as the cord remains uncut, social evolution and human progress must rest forever upon an impermanent and insecure basis. And two, that so long as a war persists, there will never come into being that world peace of which some day a world confederation of nations will be born. For it is such a confederation which is the ultimate aim and absolute inevitability of the human race. Peace. Hardly a man, woman, or child lives who has not heard the word. Throughout the ages, it has been a subject of more discussion and debate than any other single problem of mankind. In the halls of government, great orators have loudly extolled its virtues. The great prophets of every religion on earth have preached its gospel and catalogued its benefits to world humanity. And in all the world, we find the peace in the common denominator which binds together the people of all nations, of all colors and races, in common thought and prayer. Why then, after passing through thousands of years of such great desire and yearning, have we failed to find peace? Why is it that such a prolonged period of time, not one single practical and enduring step has been taken towards its absolute realization? Certainly, no one man or group of men shall be born tomorrow who shall exceed in knowledge and excel in ability all those great men who have written, spoken, and preached about peace over the long past. What shall we do then? Throw up our hands and give up? Shall we have done with peace by exclaiming that it does not exist because it cannot? That it is an unobtainable abstract? I do not believe that it is any such thing. I sincerely believe peace on earth can come to exist as a permanent condition of living. But believing in it as I do, I would not expect it to arrive on some fine morning, knock on my door, and suddenly announce its presence. No, it will never come of itself. I believe that peace can be produced, not merely conceived, but never so long as war persists. Then why does war still exist? Simply because it has not been made impossible for it to be waged. There is only one way to avoid war: impose a penalty of such dire magnitude and frightful consequence upon aggressor peoples as to render it virtually impossible for any nation to start a war. War must be fought not with weapons of ever increasing destructiveness, but with the penalties infinitely more frightful and hazardous than the war itself. This book sincerely believes that it has found such a penalty, and by its imposition upon the people of Germany, this book believes that not only could a great scourge be removed from the world, but a great good born to it. Note: the majority of authors dealing with Germanism have treated that subject purely as a product of modern times, born after the last World War, and since developed solely by Hitler and his Nazis. The reader, in pursuing the subsequent chapters on Germanism, will find out for himself just how mistaken these authors are in their viewpoints. And since the German quotations and German writings are so contemporaneously apropos, though they were all written prior to the last World War, I have thought it advisable, lest they be considered fabricated, to append a bibliography to this.